JICA lecture series of Japanese development experience to date, in line with JICA Global Agenda. Cooperation strategies by development issues.
Japan's experience in peaceful state building and post-war disaster reconstruction. Experience of state building. Today's lecturer will be Professor Shinoda Hideaki from Tokyo University of Foreign Studies.
My name is Hideaki Shinoda, and I am a professor at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. This lecture introduces the beginnings of Japan's modern state building. By looking at how state institutions were developed in Japan, I hope to provide a source of comparison for efforts in other countries. Behind the conflicts that are occurring throughout the world today, the creation of state institutions in individual countries and regions is a major issue. Although the background to conflict differs in every country and region, we can learn lessons from the experience of state building in Japan that can be shared by other countries. In Japan, modern state building has been underway since the 1868 Meiji Restoration, which abolished the previous system of rule by samurai warriors. Let's start by focusing on the Meiji Restoration, the revolution that paved the way for Japan's modern state. What caused the Meiji Restoration? There are many problems in Japan at the time. In 1853, after the US naval warships, known as the Black Ships, visited Japan, people who felt uneasy about the traditional samurai-centered Edo shogunate system began to seek a new system. Analysis reveals they faced two primary threats: domestic division as an internal threat and the fear of colonization as an external threat. The biggest threat was the collapse of the state, and the threats leading to this were domestic division and colonization by Western powers. Under the traditional system of the Edo shogunate at the time, Japan was unable to secure sufficient military power or build relations with foreign countries, so it could not counter the threat of colonization by Western powers. Looking at the domestic system, the lack of values shared nationwide and lack of a strong central government made it impossible to compete with the Western powers. Faced with the risk of national collapse, the idea that sufficient military power, international alliances, values shared nationwide, and a strong central government were needed was increasingly supported. Thus, forces rallied to create a new system in opposition to the traditional system, and a new government was born following the shogunate's return of the political power to the emperor and the Boshin War. These events were known collectively as the Meiji Restoration. The Meiji Restoration was part of a state-building process to eliminate the fear of domestic division and colonization. The fact that the Edo shogunate surrendered Edo Castle without bloodshed or full-scale battle against the revolutionary forces, and that the new government took measures such as appointing those who had fought on the shogunate side to high-level bureaucratic positions, can be seen as a reflection of the shared sense of crisis among Japanese people at that time. It can also be said that politicians shared an awareness of the crisis that existed at the national level. After the establishment of the new government, samurai who had lost their jobs as a result of the Meiji Restoration became impoverished and disgruntled, leading to rebellions and revolts in various parts of the country. After a decade of civil war following the Meiji Restoration, the new government's centralization policy progressed, and the armed struggle by disgruntled samurai families subsided. Instead, however, movements demanding democratization spread throughout the country. Let us now look at the political, security, social, and economic aspects of the new government's efforts to prevent the collapse of the Japanese state after the Meiji Restoration. In terms of political initiatives, the government centralized political power under the emperor. In order to overcome the problem of not having a strong central government, Japan also tried to develop diplomatic power and overcome the problem of a lack of international cooperation. Additionally, it set up a modern constitution as well as election and parliamentary systems. Every effort was made to overcome the problem of a lack of unified values and institutions common throughout Japan. On the security front, the government developed a strong outward-facing military and internal security sectors. This was intended to overcome the problem of a lack of military power and organizations to maintain domestic security to prevent invasion by other countries. At the same time, a conscription system in which all citizens could participate was introduced and a modern army was established. On the social front, the class system was abolished and the meritocracy system was introduced. This was also intended to help establish a strong central government. On the economic front, the economy was converted to one of modern capitalism, and an encouragement of new industry policy was implemented, giving priority to state-led industries. This was meant to increase economic strength to prevent invasion by other countries. The Meiji Restoration thus created a strong politically centralized state with the emperor at its center and promoted and enriched the country, strengthened the army policy, as well as industrialization and development. The aim was to promote state-led economic development and to become wealthy, while at the same time strengthening military power so as to be in a position to resist pressure from Western powers. This was all the result of analyzing the problems facing Japan at the time of the Meiji Restoration and then introducing policies to overcome those problems. The expansion and deepening of a centralized state structure was the rational way to counter the external threat of colonization and the internal threat of domestic division. With the Meiji Restoration, problems were solved through the creation of a new state. At the same time, however, new problems arose. The Boshin War was a civil war between the old regime and the new government. Its number of casualties was relatively low at less than 10,000. Still, the clans of the Tohoku region in northeast Japan fought particularly hard to the end and it is said that the warriors of the Aizu clan who fought the hardest were transferred to the northernmost tip of the mainland, where they were forced to live in harsh conditions even after the war. As a result, even after Japan's modernization, the Tohoku region remained underdeveloped, and regional economic disparities widened under the centralized system. In addition to its mountainous terrain and cold climate, the Tohoku region was not developed with a national capital, making it a region with one of the lowest economic standards in Japan. Politically, it was also difficult for it to produce influential politicians. The background to the frequent and extensive damage caused by tsunamis in the coastal areas of Tohoku was the large number of poor people and the lack of social infrastructure. The low economic level in Tohoku caused human trafficking after the Great Depression. In the rush to build a centralized state, comprehensive development of the country was put on the back burner. Young military officers, who would later stage a coup d'etat, complained that corrupt politicians had left Tohoku in a state of misery. Since joining the state apparatus was a powerful way to rise in the ranks, it is said that many members of the army were also from the poor farming class in the northeast. Since the purpose of establishing the new state institutions was to resist foreign invasion, the military was a major force within the new government. While this was a necessary measure for the initial goal of preventing foreign invasions, the military soon became too powerful. Politicians found it difficult to control the military, and foreign wars were fought repeatedly. Domestically, the excessive centralization of power led to the suppression of popular movements and human rights violations. By promoting domestic stability and preventing the threat of colonization by strengthening military power externally, what we might call partial peacebuilding was achieved. The institutions of the state created by the Meiji Restoration succeeded in achieving solutions to the problems that were recognized at that time, but they also created new problems that were byproducts of those solutions. This was a structural problem. Building a centralized state was a reasonable policy to address the threat of colonization and national division that existed in the early Meiji period. However, having succeeded in this solution, Japan now suffered from the new problem of excessive centralization. The inequality of domestic society and external expansionism of the international community created problems that went beyond the successful construction of a modern state. In 1945, Japan faced a major turning point with its defeat in World War II. Viewed in this way, it is clear that massive reforms and reconstruction that followed Japan's defeat in 1945 were a corrective process for Japan to overcome the limitations of its initial peacebuilding efforts. The creation of a strong central government which prevented the division of domestic society and the threat of colonization was a major achievement in terms of peacebuilding. However, its byproduct of coercive domestic governance and repeated foreign wars was a negative aspect. Therefore, the second peacebuilding process sought to correct domestic governance practices through measures such as democratization, dissemination of human rights norms, and local autonomy. Through measures such as the enactment of a new constitution that emphasized pacifism, the country would be reborn as a nation that would not only reject domestic civil wars, but also contribute to the maintenance of the international order by preventing foreign wars and never committing aggression. Diplomatic efforts were also made to improve relations with former adversaries. Political leaders at the time recognized and analyzed the problems that had become serious as a result of the modern state-building process, and this led to the establishment of new objectives and the formulation of policies in line with those objectives. This was not a total denial of initial peacebuilding achievements, and efforts were made to maintain those positive results. Thus, after 1945, the crises of domestic division and oppression, colonization, and occupation were overcome in Japan. By dividing Japan's peacebuilding in modern history into two major problem-solving cycles, we are able to see the process of state building in its initial and revised phases. In summary, this lecture has shown you how Japan created the institutions of a modern state. We hope that you now understand how the leaders at the time made policy choices that led to solutions to the problems they faced through analysis. This history of Japan also shows us that success in solving problems that were initially seen as serious can lead to the creation of other problems if there is no constant verification of success. When a new problem becomes serious, it is important to set up a new peacebuilding cycle to correct it. I hope that this lecture has provided information that will be helpful to each of you in your own country's efforts to create better institutions to achieve the goal of building a peaceful country.
Japan has modernized from a non-Western background to establish a free, democratic, prosperous, and peace-loving nation. In this sense, Japan is one of the best development models for the developing countries and regions today. In addition, Japan has contributed to economic growth in many developing countries, especially in Asia. Therefore, we would like to share with you Japan's unique experience of modernization, which is different from Western countries, and cooperation for developing countries through this video material. This video series provides a comprehensive summary by development issue according to the lineup of JICA's cooperation strategy called the JICA Global Agenda.